In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, vaccinated travellers will be welcomed with open arms to Cyprus and no quarantine.
As long as they have a double dose of an EMA-approved vaccine, authentically certified by their government, they will not only be exempt from being tested prior to flying, but they will not be placed in quarantine either.
And thousands of companies domiciled in Cyprus will have 6 months to give the details of their shareholders and owners to a new register of ultimate beneficial owners. But it won't be made public just yet.
I think it's just a two-step approach. They will need to give public access because based on the ECRIT directive, this is what is demanded. However, it will be done once the registers are in full-fledged working properly.
Well, we all know, I think, by now that our tourism industry has been suffering greatly ever since the start of the pandemic and the lockdown. It's of concern to not just the tourist industry because, of course, visitors to Cyprus visit other places and spend their money in other areas. So it's quite important that we do get this back on track, and that was good news last week when we heard that people from the UK would be allowed a restriction-free entry to the island as long as they'd received their vaccinations. That, you will recall, follows on the steps of a similar agreement with Israel. Joining us to discuss this and indeed how we're going to put Cyprus on a very special tourist map is our Deputy Minister for Tourism, Savas Perdios. So, Savas, can you start, please, by telling us about the agreements that you've reached with Israel and the UK and how they're going to work? Because some people are quite worried that although you've had a vaccination, you could still pass the COVID on.
First of all, Rosie, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. As always, a pleasure. I want to start by saying that on the 1st April, we are opening up to Israel, the UK, and a few other countries which are outside the EU. We've already opened on the 1st of March to the EU, and on the 1st of April, we are opening up to some other countries as well, UK and Israel included. Now, a new system is coming into effect, a traffic light system, where these countries are going to be categorized either as green, orange, and red. And depending on the categorization, people will need to fly and get tested accordingly. If they are in the green category, no testing is required. If they are in the orange category, 1 test is required in advance, and if it's red category, 1 in advance and 1 upon arrival. Now, the important thing about this new categorization is that it guarantees that people are not going to be put into quarantine unless, of course, they test positive when they are at the destination. So for these select countries, we guarantee a continued flow of air traffic without quarantine. What then comes into effect with the UK on 1st May is that for those who have a vaccination certificate, we are going to facilitate travel and we will not require them to have a test. It's a facilitation, but the main principle of what we have arranged or what we have done is that everybody from the UK should be allowed to travel. We do not want to discriminate by saying that only vaccinated people can travel. No, everybody can travel as long as they have the right certificate. And this certificate might be a negative PCR test or a vaccination certificate. So we always reserve the right to do random testing upon arrival. And I think that this is going to give us, to answer your question, an additional layer of safety, even when it comes to vaccinated travelers, because we random test whole aircraft, and this means that this includes vaccinated travelers as well. And let me say that even if you are vaccinated, you would still need to follow destination protocols like mask wearing, physical distancing, etc.
Right, now what's the protocol in place if somebody does arrive and you test them randomly at the airport and it's positive?
If we're talking about people who have not vaccinated, then these people will then be taken to a hospital where they will be offered free medication, hospitalization, food, beverage, and taken care of at our own expense for as long as necessary. And their close relatives or close contacts, people who have shared a room, let's say, with them or traveled with them, etc., they will also be taken to a separate facility. It's going to be a hotel where they will need to isolate, but again at the expense of our government. They will be offered free accommodation, food, drink, until their quarantine is finished or until time comes for them to fly home.
Suppose on arrival and they're coming for, let's say, a 2-week holiday, they find themselves in quarantine, what, for the whole 2 weeks? How long will the quarantine last?
The quarantine is 10 days. So if they test negative on day 10, they will be able to enjoy the last few days of their holiday as well as usual. If, let's say, they would need to leave on the 7th day, they get tested the day before they fly, and if it's negative, they are allowed to fly. If, of course, it's positive, then they would need to wait until test turns negative.
It's obviously going to be quite difficult to implement all this in a way, and you did make a differentiation at the start of that answer between people who have been vaccinated and people who haven't. So what happens if a vaccinated person also tests positive?
They will not be placed in quarantine because the rate of passing on the disease is much, much lower. So this is our promise for 2 travelers from the UK and Israel, that as long as they have a double dose of an EMA-approved vaccine, authentically certified by their government, they will not only be exempt from being tested prior to flying, but they will not be placed in quarantine either.
All right, and that brings up the fact, I was reading, I think today or yesterday, that an awful lot of the fraud that's gone on in the last year or so is COVID-related. How sure can you be that somebody turning up with a vaccination certificate or whatever has actually had the vaccination and it isn't a scam?
Well, this is where we will need the support of their home government. This is what the technical discussions are about at the moment. Their government will need to make sure that the system is in place, or a sort of verification system that authenticates the vaccination certificate, whether this is an official certificate from a GP or a digital vaccination certificate with a QR code. So this is a technical discussion that we are having with the UK and Israeli governments, but essentially it does remain their responsibility to make sure that anybody who boards and says that they have a vaccination certificate is the right one. At the end of the day, every country is going to decide on its own what type of authentication method it's going to use. And this is what we will go along with.
You mentioned at the beginning that it wasn't just these 2 countries, there were others. Which others?
Yeah, obviously Russia, Ukraine, we have Serbia, Georgia, the US, China is in there now at the EU level anyway, Australia, New Zealand, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain.
So it's a pretty long list. I mean, there seems to be very, very few people who aren't going to be allowed to travel. Let's move on, if we may, to the original reason for me asking to talk to you before all this news broke, and that was the fact that you've been working, I think, on niche tourism, special interest tourism, and you announced that there were a lot of plans in that regard. So can you outline those for us?
Yes. Basically, as we've spoken about before, Rosie, many times, despite the pandemic, we are pushing ahead full throttle with the implementation of our National Tourism Strategy 2030. As you know, we're not only here to increase the number of arrivals to our country, but we're here to make sure that everybody on the island can benefit from tourism. All regions, all areas, and all residents. This means that we need to pay a lot of attention to special interest tourism, niche tourism, a lot of areas which have not traditionally benefited from tourism. So this is very, very important to us, and we have been very active towards this direction. We utilized 2020 as a year of, crisis management because of the pandemic, but at the same time to work on a lot of incentive schemes not only to promote but also upgrade our niche tourism. So we have schemes out now which obviously promote domestic tourism. We've got schemes out which improve facilities of bike centers, biking facilities in hotels, wine tasting in wineries, access points to people with disabilities in movement. We have improvement in schemes for Wi-Fi in cultural sites. We have a lot of incentive schemes to improve the facilities in restaurants, whether this means converting the whole restaurant area, restaurants and chairs, etc., to something more traditional. We have another incentive scheme coming out where we reward through a labeling system the authentic-minded businesses of Cyprus, like Taste Cyprus. This is given to all restaurants which serve authentic food with local produce and from local suppliers. We've got Cyprus Breakfast, which we talked about a couple of years ago together. The rollout is going out very, very well, and we are intensifying. We've added the Cypriot brunch to that as well, and the Cypriot breakfast plate. So in the same way that people think of an English breakfast and they know what that looks like, now we have a Cypriot breakfast plate, and they will have an idea what that looks like. So all of these things we're working on them a lot. We are paying a lot of attention as well to hiking, biking, as I said. Backpacking is going to be big in Cyprus. We've got some stuff coming up soon, which I cannot announce yet, but we're looking at locations where facilities can be upgraded to host hikers and bikepackers. And another thing that is very exciting for us, we have an authentic route being inaugurated in September. And what is this? This is basically a 300-kilometer route exclusively in the mountain and rural areas of Cyprus. This route is going to have a lot of authentic experiences, like going to somebody's home and see how they make wine, or zivania, or halloumi, or sujoukos, or, chairs, some other type of handicraft. So basically, we aspire to use this authentic route to bring tourism closer to local communities, handicraft, local businesses, local products, etc. It's going to be a route which can be visited by anybody physically and obviously booked online, one-to-one. We are going to have augmented reality. There's going to be a loyalty program related to this. So, there's a massive amount of stuff going on, and it's really exciting. Actually, it might sound strange because we're in the middle of a pandemic, but very excited about everything that's happening at the ministry this year. And I think by the end of 2021, we will have a lot to speak about with regards to the changing face of Cyprus tourism.
I'm very glad that you were talking about, for example, putting the old traditional chairs in tavernas and things, because there was quite a reaction to the announcement that 420,000 euros had been allocated to spruce up local taverns. And I saw a lot of comments, which I have to confess I mostly agreed with, that the joy in some of our villages of going to the local taverns is the fact that they do have rather in need of a lick of paint chairs with the traditional basket work seat and so on and so forth. And if you spruce them up too much, you're going to lose that Cypriot flavour.
But this is exactly what we're trying to achieve, Rosie. We're trying to incentivize those restaurants who do not have these traditional chairs to actually buy them. Because you know very well, you've been here for a long time, and you know that there are a lot of tavernas or Cypriot restaurants that still use plastic chairs and plastic tables, for example. This is not something that we like to see, and this is exactly the focal point of what we're trying to achieve, giving these businesses the support they need to upgrade their chairs and tables to something more traditional. Not only because their place is going to look nicer and more authentic, but because it's going to give additional work to the traditional handicraft people of Cyprus. So it's a win-win situation for everybody.
OK, I know I've got to let you go in a moment. Just finally, let me ask you about numbers, because whatever you do, it's highly unlikely that we can expect anything close to perhaps even half the number of visitors that we've had in the years before the pandemic. How is that pie going to, in a sense, be divided up? Because quite a lot of smaller venues, I imagine, are going to be forced to close.
Look, I wouldn't say that a lot of venues are going to be forced to close. Certainly, everybody's business is going to be much, much lower than usual. What we're trying to achieve this year is two things. Certainly, three things, actually. The first is to do better than last year, which is a step in the right direction and a step in our recovery, which, as I said many times, is going to take more than a couple of years, probably a 3, 4, 5-year process. So that's the first thing we want to achieve. Second, we want to change the way Cyprus is perceived abroad in terms of tourism. We're changing our marketing, our logo, the way we talk about Cyprus abroad. And third, we want to take the opportunity of this downtime due to the pandemic to really change the product, upgrade it, make sure that when tourism does come back in numbers, it's more authentic, it's upgraded, it's higher quality, it's more evenly spread across the island. Yeah, so it's not about achieving records right now. Recovery is a long game. We're looking at a few years from now. What is important is to have everything in place so that when that time comes, we are ready to respond and to benefit from everything that we can. When that time comes, tourism is going to be different compared to what we knew it to be before. So we're trying to be as ready as we can when that time comes.
Well, very good luck with all of that. Savas Perdios, Deputy Minister of Tourism, joining us on this week's Cyprus News Digest.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The Deputy Minister's hope for an upswing in bookings, particularly from the UK, was dented somewhat earlier this week when the UK Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, said it was still too early to book foreign summer holidays. He said it would remain illegal to travel internationally from the UK until at least the 17th of May. That, he said, was the earliest possible date, but of course things might change. Nevertheless, here in Cyprus, the tourism industry is gearing up for the possibility of relaxations and that upswing in bookings. Travel experts and airlines have been saying that already bookings are up considerably. But of course, unless the picture is very clear, particularly as regards those travellers from the United Kingdom, then Cyprus may have to do with the other countries that are on its green list when it comes to holidaying in Cyprus.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Cyprus apparently plans to launch a register in the coming months that will identify the owners of thousands of companies on the island, and that lifts a veil of secrecy that a lot of people have been questioning for many, many years. The so-called Ultimate Beneficial Owner Register will mean that people can't hide behind shell companies. Well, I'm not a business person, but my next guest knows all about this. She is Katerina Antoniou, Director of Compliance, Risk and Anti-Money Laundering at Deloitte. So she joins us now. Katerina, first of all, the significance, if you will, of this proposed legislation, because it's been an awful long time coming.
Yes, for sure. We had, since the fourth directive, basically the fifth directive was launched in a very short time after that, and that gave a lot of pressure actually for a lot of the European states because they had to handle straight after transposing the fourth another directive into force, into local legislation, so that put a lot of pressure. And at the same time, we had a lot of other requirements like producing this register for the ultimate beneficial owners. So I would say there was a lot on the plate for the government to do in a very short time. Therefore, we have been expecting it, but it was a lot to do in the meantime as well. Now, finally, we have the registers, and also the fifth directive transposed into national law, which was passed actually last week, and it was actually published in the official gazette of the government. And the news tell us that sixth directive also going to be transposed very soon, as it's now on the steps of drafting the first draft, and it's out of consultation since, again, last week. So a lot has been done in the last, I would say, few months. Despite the delays we had, you know that the fifth and sixth, they had to be transposed by 2020, but none managed. So even at this stage, it would be good to have them, I would say.
My understanding is that companies will get 6 months to collect the details to enter into the system. During that 6 months, those who don't want to do this, of course, I suppose, can just move away, can't they?
Well, yes, it's a 6-month period to provide the details. Now, they can move away, of course. It's not an easy thing to do, easy to set, but not easily done. However, we have seen a sort of move out of the domicile of Cyprus domicile for the number of holding entities that we had in the past. So this has already started since, I would say, the bank started closing accounts for shell companies or companies that did not have Cyprus as their main activities center, so on and so forth. So we have seen this move happening for almost a year now.
How easy, or indeed do they even bother, is it for the registrar of companies to notice when it's quite obvious that these are shell companies?
No, for the registrar it's very difficult to notice this, because the information that ends up in the various, registries is, financial statements. The only difference between a shell company will be the format of what is written within the financial statement. That would make the difference for someone to understand. Therefore, the registrar itself, they won't know until somebody starts investigating through those statements. But because myself being part of a sort of a big four firm, we have seen this move because of our clients. I mean, it was something that we have noticed. It's discussions that we had with a number of our clients for the last 2 years, I would say, since the fourth directive came out and they knew that all this would happen soon. It was we have seen lots and lots of discussions taking place with customers, with clients around, the domicile, the organization of the groups, and re-domiciling the holding entities.
Now, I'm under the impression that the EU is expecting this information to be available to the public, but that doesn't seem to be happening in Cyprus. Why not?
The public access to the registries is based on the fifth directive. So this is where the public access will be given. What was transposed into the law, it was based on the clauses basically that were on the fourth directive at the time, because when they started bringing out the registers and transposing into local law, it was still at the beginning of transposing the fifth directive. Although there was a public access available, they thought they would do it in stages, because they need to protect also shareholders, and to give public access without having regulations, it was very difficult. So although this directive had this in place, the first step was to set up, first of all, the regulations, to see how the regulations work, and once the regulations were set up, then public access would be the next step. So I think it was to protect the shareholders. That's why they need to do it in a two-step process and cannot go direct to the public access. As you understand, by having all the information available for the shareholders, this could give rise to crime, give rise to things like kidnapping, blackmailing, as this information now will be very transparent. So someone that wants to take advantage would be very easy to go through the registers and see, okay, who is the owner of this company? Let's do what we need to do. So I think it's just a two-step approach. They will need to give public access because based on the fifth directive, this is what is demanded. However, it will be done once the registers are in full-fledged working properly.
So that should be, as they said, around 6 months from now.
Exactly. We expect to see that, when this is set up and working properly.
And how do you assess the difference that this will make to transparency in these matters?
There will be a lot of difference, actually, because now we have a hard time collecting sometimes information about shareholders, although since the fourth directive there is a lot more transparency required about shareholding structures, about getting all the way to the ultimate beneficial owners. As in Cyprus, for a long time now, we had the nominee sort of terminology in place a lot, we call it. So they had a lot of nominees in place of the true shareholders. So it was, again, a sort of step approach to get to the UBOs. So we needed to identify the nominees, who was sitting behind the nominees. Therefore, this is a process that takes time, and we managed to go over that step. So in the last couple of years, I would say that we see that a lot of the entities, the groups that are sitting here in Cyprus, they realize that this is something they need to do because the regulators are very strict. They require this information, so it cannot be avoided. It needs to be there. Therefore, to be even more transparent and to give in all these details is, again, a very big step. However, I think it's also a very good benefit for Cyprus because it will uplift all these past adverse accusations we had around being a country with no transparency, with taking advantage of these super complex structures, setting nominee structures, and not giving the required transparency. So overall, I think it will be a benefit for the island.
Okay, and I presume it also will make some people who are avoiding taxes on these particular holdings less able to do so.
I think that is a matter of really a proper planning when it comes to tax regimes, because a lot of people think, we got to Cyprus because we can avoid tax. That's not so. I mean, Cyprus still offers a lower tax rate compared to the remaining European countries. So this can still work for the advantage of a number of companies who want to work in a very legitimate and legal way. It doesn't have to be, a financial center that gives opportunities only to criminals. So someone that will take this as an advantage of a lower tax regime, it is still a very beneficial financial center to be in compared to other European countries. And I think this is what they need to take into advantage now, that they still have this difference in rates. There is clarity, there is transparency, so there is a very increased regulatory environment, and we have seen this. So there is safety. It's not like we're talking about, 5, 6, 7 years ago where the scene was completely different. Now things are very different. Everything is becoming very transparent. However, they can still enjoy the lower tax rate compared to the remaining EU countries.
Yeah, what I was referring to, Katerina, was the shareholders, particularly perhaps Cypriot shareholders, who could avoid the tax on their assets.
Cypriot shareholders, we didn't see this a lot with the Cypriot shareholders, I have to admit. I mean, in Cyprus, the involvement is transparent for a long time now. I mean, we don't see this creation of nominee structures and being non-transparent with regard to the Cypriot shareholders. The main involvement we have seen this, it was with foreigners. It was with shareholders, especially from the Eastern European countries that, we have seen this phenomenon of wanting to create complex structures with nominees sitting at the top with their shares. All this now, because they are taken care because of the fourth directive and the fifth directive, which is now out, I think will be eliminated. So with the Cypriot, it was never a cause of concern.
Well, that's good to know. Katerina Antoniou from Deloitte, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Until we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.